Hi, I'm Danny Kaplan, and I'm one of the StatPREP team. I'm the author of the Little Apps that we've started putting out about 3 years ago. And I'm very excited to be here today with Jennifer Ward. Jennifer, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Ward. I am an adjunct faculty at Clark College in Vancouver, Washington, and I was a member of the 2018 and 2019 Seattle hub for StatPREP.
So we've had some experience with the Little Apps. They've been very popular. And what's exciting, especially to me today, is to be able to introduce a new generation of Little Apps. So we've learned from some of the problems that we've had with the Little Apps, and we've learned especially from people's suggestions about how to make the Little Apps better. That's what we're going to talk about today, is these new Little Apps. On the chat screen, I put a link to the new Little App site. I'll just say it now, again, for the recording, but it's statprep.github.io/little app site. No spaces, just capital L, little app, capital A, site, capital S. And you're welcome to go there now. We started StatPREP about 4 years ago. In fact, we've had 3 years of summer workshops, and we learned a lot in the first year. One thing we learned is that as important as computation is to doing statistics and to students' general career lives, instructors found that there was too much emphasis on R commands in our initial year's offerings. Many liked them very much. Many felt uncomfortable using them in class. They felt that their students would not be able to work with them independently. They also were concerned, understandably, for their students not having access to R. And so we decided that we would try another approach to be able to use R, which has unparalleled power and graphical capabilities, but to use R with a mouse-driven interface so that there were no commands that needed to be given by the user of the app. Of course, there are R commands buried inside. That's what you're doing when you click on mouse, is triggering those apps. And we used a system called Shiny, which was released by our studio 6 or 7 years ago, and it has become very popular in professional data science work, especially for things that are called dashboards. And 2 years ago, we were using these little apps in the workshops. They immediately were the most popular item in our program, which is nice. It also says something about what we didn't know when we started our program. And our initial work over the next year and a half or so focused on broadening the use of the apps, a range of topics and statistics, means, proportions, regression, resampling. But over the last year, we've primarily been building on feedback from StatPREP participants, instructors, people who've been using the little apps. Jennifer, I know that you've been using some of the little apps. Would you mind telling us a little bit about what you're using and how you use it?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to put a link here in the chat window, and it is to the app that I've been currently using, or little app that I've been currently using in my statistics classes. I teach online Statistics 1 classes at 2 different community colleges. And so I like to have an active learning aspect to my classes, that they can explore and play around with data instead of just using a calculator tool to get an answer. So I put that link there to the linear regression app, and I think I'll bring it up and then I'll screen share with you guys.
Great. I just want to point out that that link is to the app that's been around for about a year and a half. It still works, It will continue to work, but this is one of the original apps.
Okay, so I'm finding, here we go. So you guys should be able to see my screen here. So this is the regression models app, and I try to target my use of apps to the most complicated part of statistics, the part where students kind of flounder the most, so that they can play around and see patterns quickly and then gain understanding from that. So what I liked about this regression models app is that they could take real live data sets. So from the NHANES data set, I have a lot of pre-nursing students, so I find this data set useful. And I have them choose explanatory and response variables, and then a regression model is made. And the cool part about this app is these little bars off to the side, which are showing the predicted response as well as the actual response. So as the students are reading through this explain tab, they go through, they learn about R squared. So not only does the app give us regression models, but we can also analyze R and R squared. So there's another tab for statistics that is pretty easy to find. And then they can start looking at the ratio of the length of these blue bars to the black bar there, and then learn that, oh, the ratio of blue to black is R, but we can then square that, and that's a value for R squared. So what I've seen in textbooks typically with R squared is you have this one sentence that students memorize, they just plug in the variables for the different answers, but there's not a whole lot of like looking at R squared from different angles. It's just that one static view. So I've liked the little apps because they can get that other picture of like, oh, okay, we are looking at variation, and oh, it's a ratio of variations, and it seems to make more sense. So I use this as a discussion in my classes, and I have the students play around by finding two variables that have no relationship to each other. So find R squared that's close to 0, and then find two variables that are really close to having an R squared of 1 or 100%. And they get to explore and keep trying things, and then they give their feedback in the discussion and then talk about their experiences and aha moments. Last term, I had a student who said that it finally clicked when they realized if they picked two variables that were related to each other, then R squared would be higher. And so I think she was picking variables like maybe systolic and diastolic maybe, or maybe it was urine volume and urine flow. And she just picked two things that seemed to logically make sense. So I loved seeing her make that connection of, oh, in the real world, these variables are related, so maybe R squared will be high, or maybe it'll surprise them and R squared might be close to 0. So that app is like Danny said, it's the older generation of the app, and he'll talk about how we've made some changes. But let's see. I will find, I have an activity here, and I've made a copy. I'm going to put it in the chat of my activity that I've used for that little app. And you're welcome to use it and change it as you need. And then you can kind of use it as a model for other apps as you use them. So here goes. I'm going to put that activity link. Sorry, it's a little bit long there, but you should be able to see my activity and then modify it, improve it, make it more awesome, share it with other people, and have fun with it. So Danny, I have a question. In what other ways can we use these little apps? Like I've used it in my class for discussions. What else do you see?
Well, so there are some things I certainly had in mind when I wrote these. Very common, important ideas in statistical inference. One of them is to be able to look at sampling variation directly. So we're trying to teach, of course, sampling variation from just the one sample that we have. The little apps provide a way to rapidly collect new samples. And so you can see how the statistics or the models or the means or the differences in between means jump around from sample to sample. And you can explore how this varies with, say, the sample size. So you can literally see it. And I'll show an example of that. I think a really important thing is that you can use randomization to show what things look like under the null hypothesis. So the null hypothesis does not have to be some abstract idea. It can be made into a concrete form. And we do that in the standard way by randomizing the order of the response variable. We wanted people to be able to look at the changing values from sample to sample and with randomization and with changes in sample size in a statistical report form in addition to a graphical form. And all those are things that could be done with the original generation of little apps. But there were problems. And we got feedback from instructors about those.
What was the feedback that you got from those workshop participants and instructors?
Well, the most fundamental and in retrospect obvious feedback is that the graphics are too small. Do you mind putting up your screen share again if you have that little app open?
The older one or the newer one?
The older one.
The older one, okay. Yeah.
Okay, and you can see that there's a lot going on in the screen. There is a graphic, it's not teeny, but there's also a lot of other stuff on the screen that's distracting from the graphic. There's this explain tab, and then there's the controls, and those controls vary a bit from app to app. And that has been confusing to some people because they're not always sure the apps are similar enough that they're not sure which app they're using, and it's easy to get confused. So let's show you the new style of app. Do you have one up or should I bring one up?
I think I can get one up here.
That's the old.
Here we go.
All right, so dismiss that splash page. We'll come back to that later. And right now, the first thing one does in an app, of course, is to choose what data. But if you would just click on the little graph icon up at the top.
It's up here?
Yep. And so now we can make a graph take up almost the whole screen. And why is that important? Well, one reason is that they're visually impaired students who can see the screen, but without such high resolution. And a big graphic makes it easier for them to work with it. Another is that a lot of students have mobile devices that they would use these little apps on. And so you could technically run the little apps, the old generation of little apps on the cell phone, but it was awfully confusing. And so we've tried to scale them so that they run on a smartphone. I have an iPhone SE, which is the smallest version of them. I had that in mind as I wrote these things, but it will also work on other types of smartphones. And the graphics and the controls you see are all readily available. And the graphic is still big enough that you can make sense out of it.
Yeah, hopefully everyone can see that I have scaled my window down really narrow to simulate a cell phone, or I can make the window bigger and then it'll go back to its original shape.
Another thing we noticed was during the workshop, one of the activities was to have instructors write their own activities using the little apps. And of course, they would do this by writing down instructions that they might give their students or challenges they might pose to their students. And as we looked at what they were writing, we saw that a very common theme was for them to say, look at this and now change something and tell us what changed, all right? And that's fine to describe, but it doesn't provide the students an easy way to do a side-by-side comparison. So that's one of the things we introduced. Jennifer, Jennifer's just about to click that snowflake icon in the new app. If you click on that.
So it says freeze the current plot in the little pop-up description.
That's right. We had to make the controls small so that they would fit on cell telephones. And now if you go to go to the graph tab, you'll see nothing. Well, that's the compare tab. Go to the graph tab, that's the graph, making it very big. But if you want to compare things side by side, then go to the compare tab.
And I think we found a bug, Danny. That what I'm seeing is very, very skinny plots. And I don't know.
All right, let me bring it up on my, that's great. There's authenticity in this. If you would drop the screen share, I'll try to bring it up. I don't know if that's a browser issue.
Oh, that could be it.
I'm going to share the screen in a second. How do I do that? I go here, share screen. Okay, is that showing recursively, or is it just showing the browser window? I can't see what it's showing.
It shows your entire screen, but I can see that tab in the new little app.
Okay, so here, let me go to where Jennifer was going. I'm going to freeze a plot. Again, I don't know. This is one of the things that you have to do when you develop apps. See what goes wrong on all sorts of different browsers. Let me make this smaller, as Jennifer has done before. I think I made it. Okay. So there we have the same plot side by side. One is current, one is frozen. Why are they the same plot? Because we're showing the one I just froze. Let me take a new sample. And you see this is new data. It's all selected from the same main set of data. And you can see the regression line is a little bit different. And here you can click on it and you can see from sample to sample how things change. Or if you wanted to look at a different sample size and get an idea for what's going on there, you can easily change the sample size. Then let's say freeze that. And now what I'll do is I'll randomize the response variable. You see the regression line is completely flat. That's what happens in the null hypothesis. But in the frozen data, which was not shuffled, you see the regression. And now I've just unshuffled the left display too. You see that the regression line is not zero. So we've made that a very easy thing to do. It also applies to the statistics. So the statistical report, you can see, here, I'll generate a new one. I'm looking at the F statistic, which is my preferred way of looking at things. I think it's much simpler than what we've done traditionally, but perhaps people want to look at R squared. See, R squared is very small. I can take a new sample and see how much it varies. I can shuffle, and now you see R squared has gotten very small compared to the original set of data. So we wanted to make things, it easier for people to compare a new setting to an old setting, different sample size, randomization, and so on, or even a different kind of model. Another thing is that people were really interested in uploading their own data. We heard this over and over from people. So I'm going to go to the data.
One of them was probably me, because in my stats class, I have students do a survey in the first week of class, and I ask them probably 30 random-ish questions about themselves, and then I have them analyze that data in little projects throughout the term. And so I thought it would be really cool to be able to upload my own data set into these apps and be able to play around with the data really quickly.
Yeah, let's do that in a little bit. But people want to be able to use their own data. And people also pointed out that the little apps did so many different things that they could be confusing when students switch from one to the other. And so one of the things we did in the new generation is to make the bulk of the display absolutely the same The tabs appear in the same places. The controls are in the same places. Things like a code book you can get by pressing the little spy icon. Things like that splash page that showed up at the beginning that gives you some brief instructions generally for how to use the little apps. That is always there. The shuffle is always there. Snowflake, new sample, sample size. And we save screen space, of course, by putting the sample size and other things in pop-ups. So you can change that. And you don't have to have the control looking at you all the time. So each app on its own, though, has a special set of controls. And these will differ from place to place. But other than those controls that differ, and other than the details of the graphic, a different graphic for t-tests than for regression, for example, they're just the same from app to app. So we think that will help students to use them more fluently, and in general, just improve their ability to predict what's going to happen when they press a certain control. All right. So let me summarize some other things that we've done. I'm going to go to the data tab. In a little bit, we'll have Jennifer upload some data from her own survey that she mentioned. The data tab has a small graphic. This is just a copy of the big graphic. It's just there so that you can see immediately what happens. In the data tab, you choose, of course, which data set you want to look at, and then which response variable, which explanatory variable you want to look at. And in addition to being able to upload their own data, instructors also wanted to be able to use the data that comes with the textbook that they're using. And so we've made that change. So now there's a control called source package, and we've added in data from several books and packages. For example, the Lock5 data set is there. They're very generous in making that available easily to use in our applications. The Open Intro, same thing. They have an R package that contains their data, so we link to that. Kate Kozak has a book, Stats Using Technology, and many people use Triola. And so we've included the Triola data sets. I'll go there for right now. And when you go to a new data set, then all of the ones listed in the textbook are there. And you can choose, here's one, I don't know what's in it, births. So this looks like it's got the gender right now being plotted against the length of stay. The documentation is in the Triola textbook, so we can't just copy that out. But we can look at, say, birth weight and whether or not the mother was admitted, or what day of the week they were admitted. So these are data that Triola provides, but the Lock5 data sets and the like are there. Let's see. We've added a bookmark feature. So that little report is more or less gibberish when you first look at it, but this is a summary of the state of the app, telling us what data sets, what variables, what the sample size is, and so on. And so students could potentially copy this out to say what they looked at. And you can also just file a bug report. When you see something that's not working the way you think it should work, you can go press on that link, and now you have a form where you can give us your email address, but describe what the problem was, and then we'll have right away what the state of the app was when you did it. So we're hoping that will make it easier for us to incorporate people's experiences with the app. Another change, let me go to, let's go to, say, Lock5 data set, caffeine taps. All right. A lot of these data sets just have two variables. Yeah, this bike commute data set has several variables. And we're looking at a regression app here. We might be looking at a Ttest app or something like that. But regression apps, or regression in general, requires that the response variable be a quantitative variable. Well, we wanted to make the same variables available for all the settings. So, for example, I'll look at bike. And they have two kinds of bikes, evidently, in the this Log5 data set, steel frame bikes and carbon fiber bikes, I guess. And what you see here for each bike in the sample is which bike it was, and then whatever their month variable means. So these carbon bikes, all the January 1st were carbon bikes. So we've converted the categorical variable to a quantitative one, a 0, 1 variable. And then the regression is just telling us the probability for each kind of bicycle as a function of the explanatory variables. So across apps, you'll see the same variables available. And whenever possible, we do something sensible to make it work with the statistical technique that you're using. And there's a little message when that happens. This one says categorical response variable converted to a 0, 1 indicator variable. Right? Just so that you don't get any surprises when you pick new variables and you can see what happened to the raw data. And of course, the raw data are being, that are being plotted are being shown down here. So you can get a quick glance at what's going on.
I really like in your plot, Danny, that the 0s and 1s aren't just labeled 0s and 1s, but they actually took one of the categories and applied it to the 0, and then the other label to the 1. So it gives a lot more meaning to the graph.
I'm glad you noticed that because it was a lot of work to do that.
Yeah, I imagine.
And for categorical variables with more than one level, I'm not sure what we're going to get month. I can't do very much with 12 of them, but I don't know that I'm going to get this here. Let me go to another data set. Okay, so let's look at the team. It has to pick one. It picks the most heavily populated, or if they're ties.
Oh.
And so here we're comparing the New York Yankees, I guess, against every other team in the league. Well, we've got to have a number in regression. That's why we do that. Perhaps at a later date, we'll offer a pop-up control so you can decide which level goes into level. But for something like, is it going to be a league? Yeah. For something like league, it's easier. There's just two levels of league, the American League and the National League. And then, Jennifer, do you want to take over and upload your data and describe?
Yeah.
School? Yeah, okay.
I'll go ahead and take back the screen sharing.
While we're doing that, I'm going to post the link to the website again on the chat for people who didn't see it. Tom?
All right, so I have a small chunk of my own survey from this term. So I teach at 2 different schools. So one of my survey questions is which school you're taking this class at. And then I asked about 30 questions after that. And so I took a small chunk of it just with a couple of variables just to check this out. And I downloaded from my Google survey, I turned the data into an Excel spreadsheet, and then I exported that data into a CSV file. So I'll go to the source package and I'll pick upload and then browse my files for my CSV file. Upload complete. I'll go back to the app. And what I have here, so in this regression model, it just picked a couple of variables. The data set is what school you're taking this class at, did you eat breakfast this morning, how many cars have you owned in your lifetime, and how many ear piercings do you have, if I recall. So here we have the the uploaded data set, the response was automatically picked to be, did you eat breakfast, yes or no? And again, like Danny was showing, it picked no for the 0 and yes for the 1, just as it decided. And then the explanatory variable is how many cars have you owned in your lifetime. So one student has owned, oh, what is that, about 16 cars maybe in their lifetime. So maybe that's influencing our data set here, but I can change my, let's change the response to ear piercings. And so we can take samples from this data set. I had 46 students respond. There might have been some duplicates actually, now that I think about it, but I can take smaller samples and look what happens with the pattern. So with everybody, so you can also select all and show your entire population. Now we can go to pick, let's say a sample size of 20, and then take random samples and then look what happens with the regression line. So we can see mostly there's a negative slope to our regression line, but who knows, maybe we'll take enough samples and we'll actually get, oh, there we go, perfect. Just what I wanted, the positive slope. And if we want to then do some comparisons, I can freeze my graph here. So frozen it, I can go over to the compare tab. And I think this might be a thing with my browser here, but it'll show you. Yeah, it's
okay.
A little funky there, but I can take a resample and you can see it's kind of changing over there, even if my browser's acting up today. Yeah, so I think I will be having my students work with this app later in the term, and I'll give them that full data set, and then they can also compare what's happening from school to school with my students, even with the exact same questions. So I'm thinking, given that this term is an unusual term for everybody, having these ways to actively look at the data and quickly generate answers and not get too bogged down in learning commands for their calculator or for their fingers, but they can mouse click through this. I think having some sort of final project that is based on a data set that the students can work with really easily would be a good way to sum up this entire term. And then I can build throughout the term to get up to that point of that final project.
Great, great. So if you could return the screen to me, I'm just going to try to do this the right way now. Let's see. All right. I'm going to share my screen, and we're looking now at the website for the little app. So this we've built a website that's linked to on statprep.org, but we built a website specifically for orienting things that are relevant to the little app. And the front page of it has a list of the little apps. There are 6 right now. It's possible to add more. That's one of the hidden changes behind this new generation, is that it's now much easier to program up new little apps. If you have a graphic, you can basically do it. And I want to show you in just a minute some of these other apps, just to give you a quick guide at them. But earlier in the webinar, Jennifer pointed out a lesson that she had put on Google Docs so that we can all benefit from it. So that's the kind of thing that we're going to put under the activities link here, so that if an instructor writes a lesson and wants to share it with people, then we can easily do that. And that will replace the built-in explanation that was in the old generation of apps. So rather than putting one unique explanation in an app, we'll have links on the website to the explanations. And then if there are people who want to write an explanation with a different perspective, that's great. We can also post that. So let me show you some of the other little apps. It's gone to sleep while I was waiting. This one, as you can see, is the Center and Spread little app. And in every little app, this splash page comes up you'll notice it's exactly the same except for the title on all of them. And so soon what you'll do is dismiss it. In fact, most people dismiss it before they've read it even the first time. Not necessarily the best practice. But this is an app where the graphic can be annotated with various quantities. For example, the mean, because this is center and spread. I have to go to this menu specific, the standard deviation. And we write the standard deviation as a kind of ruler. So for this group of people,
Love that.
the standard deviation is larger than for the other group of people. And I'll mention this is one of those cases where we're doing center and spread, numerical variable, where we're explaining that the categorical variable that we're using here was constructed out of the height variable. So center and spread, here is the points and densities little app. And this is the only little app that just has a single variable involved in it. So I'll zoom in on that graph. So this is something that we did previously. Let me make more data just because it's about densities. This is something that we did previously in a app called Rare and Common, where students could use sliders. It was quite awkward in order to define regions that they considered common or rare. And now you can just move the points around if you want to investigate what fraction of cases are in a region that you think is rare, or maybe you think should be rare. You can just move those around. And that's typical of the way we've changed the apps. And then there's other controls. For example, you could display the density as a violin, which is something we do a lot in the StatPREP materials. And we can even do the practice that we encourage people to do, which is to put the response variable on the y-axis. And so there's the violin. So all sorts of things you can change. And we can now have, because it's a pop-up menu, we can have explanations about the controls. So we can be a little bit more guiding in helping students understand what the controls are about. So this is the dense points and densities little app. The next one, now we've looked at about three of them.
Danny, I actually used that points and densities plot, the older version of it, in my statistics class when I was introducing the normal distribution, because the variable would have a normal-ish shape to it. And so I had students decide what they thought was rare, expected, and kind of give their middle section. And then they were able to talk with each other about what they thought was uncommon and get a sense for just in general, what do people think is common versus uncommon, and compare that against a normal distribution. So it kind of challenged their understanding of normal and what normal is defined by statisticians versus normal as a human construct.
That's a very good point. And the variable I had on previously is one that's infamously not normally distributed income. So perhaps a bad example, but when the app starts up, it picks variables at random, just so there's some display to look at. So here's height, which has more of a normal distribution. You can see the gray line outlines a normal distribution, and the little gray boxes tell what fraction of cases are in that. The lines start out at plus or minus 1. And then there are these very, very short people who we have a special word for in English called children. And they make the distribution distinctly not normal. So maybe that's not what you always want to look at. This is the, bring it up again, this is the Ttest little app. And the graphic was very well received from before. We can show it, the Ttest, we can show the confidence interval. This graph I think is big enough to see what you need to see now. You can turn on the T interval and such, change the confidence level. And because we have room for explanation, we can explain things like equal and unequal variance T-tests. And so you can explore those also. Or if it's not important to you, you might just want to talk about whether the confidence intervals overlap.
I'm really excited to use this app this term.
I think it should be great. This is not mental health bad days, physically active. Let's do physically active versus, what's going to affect it? TV hours. They're not that different, the two groups, more than 4 hours and the others. But one thing you can do, I think is very helpful, is to be able to randomize. You see our data set is so small that we're just getting these huge jumps even so. What would happen if we had more data? Still randomized. Turn off the randomization. Yeah, there's not much going on with this variable.
I also wanted to point out that jittering is something that these plots use a lot. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with that, but if we're looking at TV hours and you're fitting into one category or another, you're not really expecting your data to have any width on that x-axis, but there is some width to these plots to show you that there is repetition in the data points, and we've just made it easier on our eyes by making that plot wider.
That's right. We use a lot of modern graphical modalities here. So jittering is not uncommon, except in intro stats textbooks for some reason. They need to be updated more often. But jittering, transparency, statistical annotations, and even things like auxiliary plots. Let's see if this has this app.
Yeah, actually, Nicole had a question about that
Yes.
I glossed over earlier. She was asking about where to find that variance in the data. It was back in the regression models app, but to be able to calculate that ratio of bars, we had to click on the auxiliary graph.
We'll stop there in just a second. And of course, there's a stats tab. I haven't frozen anything yet, but this is giving the t-test report. There's the t-statistic, there's the p-value. Not a great surprise. Oh, it's shuffled. What happens when I unshuffle? Well, the p-value didn't change very much. So that says something. This is one of the apps that I'm most pleased with. This is an app that would go along with, say, the Lock 5 book or the Tintle book. It's an app about resampling. And again, the controls are very much the same. Let me go to the graphic page. And so what it's showing us here is a sample. How big? Size 50. And a resample of that. And the resample, all the circles are from the sample. The blue ones were included in the resample. And the little number tells you how many times that particular point was resampled. This one, 3. But let me show an auxiliary graph. So we wanted to have one graph to show what a resample is. But we also wanted to be able to show across many realizations, how many, let's do 20, what the spread of values are. And so this is a kind of informative plot if you're trying to decide whether or not there are big differences between these groups. That's a statistical lesson. We don't have to do it now. And of course, this one has a special control to resample. So the sample stays the same, but you draw a new resample. So that's kind of specialty graphic. And then there's the last one I'll show you, and I'll get back to that regression one, is about stratification. So confounding is one of the most important aspects of multivariate thinking, which is an emphasis in the Gaze report. And so this allows you to put up in a relationship and then compare the relationship. Go to a bigger sample size. So things are always easier with a bigger sample size. Compare the relationship for 2 different levels of a covariate. And here, there's not really any difference between the females and the males in their relationship between total cholesterol and diabetes age. Well, maybe those aren't very interesting variables, but you can have students explore variables And a good activity might be to find pairs of variables where the relationship does differ when you introduce a covariate. All right, so the question we had before was about the regression app.
Yep.
Okay, so here's a standard kind of thing, a model, weight against sleep hours. Now why? They've been picked randomly, but sometimes it's good working with students to be able to say, do you see anything there? And they don't have anything to guide them except what the data and the statistics show.
Mm-hmm.
You know, R squared is an important quantity, and we try to make a virtue out of R squared by providing an auxiliary graph. And that was innovated in the original generation of apps, and we've carried it through here. But sometimes you don't want to be able to look at the auxiliary graph, or if you're comparing two graphs, it can be a bit crowded to look at 4 graphs, the 2 that you're comparing, but each one has 2 graphs. So you can plot out, if you want just the auxiliary graph, just the main graph. And this is true across apps. About half of the apps have an auxiliary graph, and we're interested in suggestions for useful graphs to add to the other ones. So that's the quick tour of these apps. In the chat window, are there other questions? Let me stop sharing here.
I think that's all. Yeah, so what's next, Danny?
Well, we're at the end of our time. We have time for some questions, of course, and we can stay on even when the recording ends for those of you who would rather ask questions without them being recorded, but asking questions with them being recorded is a help to everyone. The next StatPREP webinar is May 18th at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific, 2:30 my time Central. And that's going to be Tim Hesterberg from Google and Kate Kozak, our own Kate Kozak from StatPREP, who are going to be talking about what you need to know about the bootstrap. So we're looking forward to that webinar. That's May 18 at 3:30 Eastern. And so I see now there's some questions coming up. Let's turn to those questions. I'll say to those of you who need to leave, thank you for attending. We hope you find these apps useful, this new generation of apps useful. I'll emphasize that the old apps remain where they were. The links that you've had in the past will still continue to work. We have no plans to take them down, although we would encourage people, as is convenient for them, to shift to this new generation, because that's what we're going to be maintaining into the future. Well, so let me answer a question so I'll say thank you to the people who need to leave. Mark Aarons asked a question, am I right that each student would need to upload a file that I have locally? And the answer is, if it's your own data that's not already built into the app, then each student has to upload a file as things stand now. However, we can use that website to make it possible for us to pre-position instructor files so that they will show up in the menu of the little app. So if that's a feature that people would like to see, then we can add that in. It doesn't make any large changes to the user interface. So it adds a new capability without adding a new control, a new complexity. And we're asked whether the recordings will be available. Yes, they're going to be posted on the StatPREP website. And we have a question about registering, joining the StatPREP Hub community, which we love to have people do. So Syed, we're sorry that you had some trouble registering there. We'll try to take care of you and contact you. So if you can just send me an email so I have your return email address, I'll get in touch with you.
I think Grace might be able to answer the question better about, sorry, going back to another question about the recording and when it will be made available.
And we've already had.
Sure. So, hi all, I'm Grace. I'm the programs assistant at the MAA. So normally it takes between, I don't know, like 24 hours, give or take, for the recording to fully process on Zoom. And then I get the link over to Danny or Kate, and they post it on the StatPREP website,
Okay.
and that's where you can view it. And then additionally, we can, you know, Danny, if you would like to, we could certainly look at posting it on MAA Connect as well. And then additionally, I saw a question about getting into our StatPREP Hub community by registering through the MAA website. So Syed, definitely email Danny. I'm going to drop my email as well in the chat. If you email both of us, we will be able to connect you with the right person. And additionally, I have some webinar tutorials and how-to guides and things like that that might help us kind of sort out your exact issue that you're having.
I did just find the StatPREP website and put it there in the chat so that everyone can see our webinar description, and then the link will be down below when it's ready for the recording.
And as you use these little apps, do feel free to hit that little bookmark icon. And when you have a suggestion, perhaps the suggestion is the axis labels are too small. Whatever the suggestion be, if you make it, then we can address it. So even though that's listed as a bug report, it's also a suggestion report. And we've gotten so much out of the users' feedback here that we're hoping that can continue, and we'll be able to improve these apps incrementally as we go forward and add new apps as people have requests for particular modes of data display or particular techniques of statistical analysis. So I think that will do for the recording. And thanks again for coming to this StatPREP webinar.
Yep, thanks everyone.